New reports are in, and Helldivers 2 has hit yet another previously unthinkable milestone. Now, alongside this breaking news are other fascinating points about the Helldivers 2 player base split, how us divers like to populate and play other gaming titles, and what could be Arrowhead's drive to capitalize on the massive markets in the Far East. Rarely do we get a look behind the curtain, but today is one of those days, which is everything I want to take a look at today. If you want to help support the channel, you know what to do. Now let's get into it. Now, if you've been anywhere close to my channel, you know that I geek out on stats, analytics, and data because, as a quick example here, we've all seen how Ark Survival Evolved's publisher Snail Games, an outfit that I've covered here on the channel many times, and how they put on the brave face while out in public, throwing around bits and pieces of stats that cast them in a good light. But of course, when it comes time to speak the truth to their investors and their shareholders, we often get a completely different story from the false bravado they were throwing around in press announcements and so on. Helldivers, though, for the most part, has kind of bucked that trend. They've not been out there hitting social media with massive splashes like, hey everybody, look at us, 18 million copies sold. Instead, letting third parties do the posting for them, like this one from Bextra Life we've seen post on Facebook, and of course, yours truly here when I ran this video back in late August 2024. We also know that Helldivers 2 is PlayStation's fastest selling game of all time, racking up an insane 12 million units sold in just 12 weeks, beating out God of War Ragnarok, and all the while, Helldivers 2 and Arrowhead survived the most epic review bombing in gaming history, hitting an astronomical 221,000 negative reviews back on May 2nd, 2024, courtesy of Sony coming out of left field with a dormant account creation ultimatum to the Helldivers player base. And of course, we've seen the highest of highs, like the attack and defense of Super Earth and the reappearance of the Illuminate on Calypso, and we've also seen the lowest of lows, like the escalation of Freedom update, and of course, we can't forget Into the Untested. The point of all this build-up is to say that 99.9% of games and studios out there would have cracked and folded if they faced a small percentage of what Helldivers 2 has had to endure. Yet somehow, some way, this game surprises us and it comes back from the brink of disaster each and every time to live another day. Now, the final point I want to throw in here before we actually get to the heart of this discussion is that Arrowhead actually never expected Helldivers 2 to pop off like it did. I've talked about this several times in previous Helldivers videos, but when I was invited to Arrowhead's headquarters last February in Stockholm, I got to sit down with members of the dev team to ask them about what the studio's expectations were when Helldivers 2 was launching back in 2024. And they were incredibly honest with me, saying that in their planning phase, the absolute highest number of players they were expecting, I mean, we're talking about what they thought would be the craziest, hey man, can you imagine if we could hit this number? I know, bro, it'd be awesome. Number of players was 50,000. And that's not just on PC or PlayStation. That was their best case scenario for every player across the globe, all platforms included. So you can expect how much pants shitting there was when Helldivers hit 458,709 players on PC, its all-time highest peak for Steam back on February 19th, not including PlayStation. And from that point, we've seen this game come out of nowhere and set record after record, despite their best efforts sometimes to sabotage their own success. And this brings us to the latest round of figures, and Helldivers 2 just continues to chug along, hitting another milestone as Alinea Analytics brings us, quote, Helldivers 2 sells 20 million copies based on copies sold alone. Helldivers 2 has generated over 700 million in gross revenue, accounting for regional pricing and historical discounts, of course. And Helldivers is keeping fans engaged, with 3.6 million diving in last month across Steam, PS5, and Xbox. Our estimates show that over 250,000 gamers have played Helldivers 2 for over 500 hours. Super Earth is in good hands. Okay, earlier I mentioned Snail Games and of course their cash cow franchise Ark Survival, both Evolved and Ascended. And one thing Snail does, which is par for the course in the games industry, is when they're not doing well for overall game sales, they trot out the DAU counts, or the daily active users, and they throw out some really big numbers to try to distract the public, like 250,000 daily active users across all platforms, to try to convince the world that everything is just fine within the Ark franchise, because what they're trying to keep from the public is how poor the game sales have been. And that translates to dollars not coming into the company, and that ultimately pisses off their shareholders. But here again, Helldivers is bucking the trend, carving its own path, showing that not only does it have the monthly active users at 3.6 million for the month of December, and keep in mind we had no new content in December, but it's also continued to sell, topping now over 20 million units sold. So you've got the replayability, you've got the player engagement numbers, because they're clearly there, but then you also tack on the continued sales of the game. And keep in mind, this doesn't take into account how much Arrowhead takes in whenever they release a war bond. I know Helldivers is currently sitting at number 16 on the Steam top sellers charts, based not on units sold, but dollars generated. But each and every time when they release a new war bond, like they just did with Redacted Regiment, or next week with the upcoming Siegebreakers war bond, Helldivers will once again shoot up this dollars generated list on Steam, passing all the heavyweights like Ark Raiders and like Marvel Rivals, at least for a few days. And of course, the addition of Xbox Team Green bolstered the game even further, as we learn here again from Alinea, who says, quote, "The Xbox edition, which landed a year and a half later in August 2025, gave Helldivers 2 the push it needed to cross the 20 million milestone, contributing 1.6 million units. Despite PlayStation publishing Helldivers 2, the game's virality largely spanned from Steam, its top platform by players. Arrowhead fostered an instant, viral community and a cooperative shooter genre. The $40 price and the satirical humor helped Helldivers 2 capture the zeitgeist, fueled in no small part by the viral video platforms. Capitalism managed. Steam remains the primary driver of Helldivers 2's success, accounting for 13.1 million copies, more than double the 5.6 million units on PS5. I've reported on this now many times, and the fact that Helldivers is driven by its PC sales and engagement. And that's no shade on PlayStation or Xbox, but in this case, the numbers are the numbers, man. 13 million plus on PC. 5.6 million on PlayStation and 1.6 million on Xbox. And even now, at the time of this recording, which is kind of late on Thursday evening, we've got just under 65,000 players logged on worldwide. And according to SteamDB, 34,500 of those logged on are on PC, which at the current time is what? A little over half? So it's about a 50-50 split between Steam and both consoles added together. But clearly, Sony's decision to bring Helldivers 2 to Steam day one proved to be the 200 IQ play, even though we've seen the Sony suits resist moves like this year after year, eventually slowly thawing up to the idea of releasing their beloved PlayStation titles on day one, like here with Helldivers, and in this case, it made them look like geniuses. One fascinating stat, though, that Alinea brings forward, and it's one that I didn't actually think about, is the cross-population of Helldivers players who gravitate more towards PvE co-op experiences. As they say, quote, "The crossover data for Steam players reveals a deep affinity for affordable cooperative PvE experiences among Helldivers 2 owners on Steam." And then they go on to say 64% of those have played Left 4 Dead 2, 52% have played Lethal Company, 48% have played Phasmophobia, and 40% have played Repo. This trend extends to newer releases, with 22% of the Helldivers 2 Steam audience also playing Ark Raiders. As we noted in previous reports, the PvE elements of Ark Raiders were a fundamental component of its early adoption and success. I can tell you that for me personally, I can place a check mark next to Left 4 Dead 2, Lethal Company, and Ark Raiders. I've considered Repo, and Phasmophobia is a hell no. Horror games are just not my thing, but really interesting here to see how they were able to cross-reference the data against Helldivers and other games and peg the trend. Players that like PvE co-op experiences tend to not only like it in one title, but multiple titles. A point they hammer home with this chart and statement: co-op games on Steam generated over 8 billion, yes I said billion with a B, last year, a 9% year-on-year increase. And taking a look at this chart, early 2024 shows us both Helldivers 2 and, of course, who could forget Pocket Pair's smash, Pal World. Then into 2025, you see Schedule 1, Peak, Split Fiction, Repo, and Monster Hunter Wilds. While later last year, Are We There Yet?, Borderlands 4, and Ark Raiders then hit the charts. And I tend to believe the data here because, I've got friends, like I'm sure you've got friends, that are super loyal to this co-op PvE genre. You can ask them to tag along for some PvP. You might hit them up for a few rounds of Battlefield, and they will flat out decline you each and every time. But you hit them with a PvE co-op game like, say, a Helldivers 2 or like Back 4 Blood or a loot run on Ark Raiders, and they are there 10 out of 10 times. But since base Helldivers 2 packages have been out there for now, nearly 2 years, and it's also on all major platforms, including PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, I guess they could port it over to Switch. Good God, what that would run like. Anyways, outside of new content drops, Sony and Arrowhead need a way of increasing their presence because the simple fact is that Helldivers 2 is driven by its ability to find and recruit new players to replace those that have had enough and have reached a point of burnout, which is the final point Alinea Analytics touches on. Quote, China is worth mentioning here as a factor in Helldivers 2's Steam dominance. While the Chinese console market is growing, it remains a niche segment compared to the global version of Steam. A gray area too, but more ubiquitous. Currently, China is the number 2 market for Helldivers 2 on Steam at over 10% of the audience, trailing only the US at 40%. On PS5, China drops to the 7th largest market at less than 3% of the total base. PlayStation also has this data, has big plans to target China to increase its total addressable market, and is taking note for future PC releases, no doubt. Stellar Blade is another second-party PlayStation Studios indicator for Sony here. As you can see in the Alinea platform screenshot below, Stellar Blade's Steam port just hit 2 million copies sold. Almost half are based in China. Stellar Blade's Steam copies sold are catching up to the PS5 version, and China is the reason. Now, one way you can get in with this untapped market is what we've already seen Arrowhead attempt to do when they sold a 15.75% stake of their company to Chinese gaming giant Tencent back in July 2024, a deal that apparently cost Tencent $83 million. Now, what was interesting about that purchase at the time was that it was not publicly disclosed, finding its way only to the public nearly a year afterwards in 2025. However, when it was made public, Johan Pilstedt, the company's former CEO, now turned CCO, stated that this partnership will provide the company with more opportunities in the Chinese market. He also added, quote, the Chinese player base is the holy grail in the gaming industry. Now, I honestly don't know how many more copies Helldivers 2 can sell past this 20 million mark, which by all accounts is light years past what the studio and Sony ever imagined happening. But with the overall scope of this game and its popularity, and given its ability to grow in untapped markets, a few percentage points here and there could mean millions more copies sold. And apparently, Johan and Arrowhead, and now Tencent, know where they want to target. Not only for however many more years Helldivers 2 is up and running, but hear me out, I'm going to guess here the ultimate end game is for whatever Arrowhead's next game is. Assuming it stays connected with its present markets and player base, and it's also able to expand with a heavy presence into massive markets out there that still stay relatively untapped. But some insane numbers overall, right? I never expected this game to top 20 million copies sold, but they did it despite all the headaches and all the heartbreaks. Here's where I'd like your feedback though. Drop a comment with the final copy sold number you think Helldivers 2 will eventually reach. Is it going to be 25 million, maybe 30 million, or higher? Whatever your thoughts on it, leave a comment. Let's get a healthy community discussion going here. Remember to hit subscribe and to ring the notifications bell to receive my latest upload alerts. Thanks goes out to all of our hardcore channel members and their continued support. By the way, if you want to join the ranks, look for the join button on my channel homepage, as we've got tiers and perks for all levels of supporters. Until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer, signing off.